My name's Stuart Bungay. I'm the CEO and co-founder of the OpenWorks Group. And today we're going to be speaking about lending and consumer lending and how we really see the future for that here at the OpenWorks Group. So no doubt COVID is going to have a profound medium to longer term effect on the economy and the population. To some people, I think this will just mean there'll be an acceleration of trends that have been evident in the economy for some time. I think you look at things like online retail and cashless transactions as kind of classic examples of that. But the recession that we experience out the back of COVID, I think, is going to be a bit different. It's not going to be kind of akin to some of the other recessions that have been associated with bubbles, like the dot-com bubble, and to some extent like the global financial crisis. I think this recession is going to be characterized by longer-term unemployment. And I think that unemployment also is going to arise in places which in the past maybe haven't been impacted by these recessions. I guess many people will experience job loss or declining income for the first time in their lives and are now looking for ways to kind of deal with that change of circumstance. Obviously, the government furlough schemes and various payment relief mechanisms have provided support for consumers to bridge the gap, but this won't last forever. But those furlough and other support schemes do, however, create a problem for lenders in that accurately understanding people's financial position is going to become much harder, and then forecasting how that's going to change in the short term and the medium term, I think will be close to impossible. In the world of consumer lending, this economic dislocation is already having a significant impact on lending volumes. But I think it's also going to trigger a much broader change in how lending decisions are made. Lending's traditionally relied on CRA data to deliver insight into likely future performance. But in response to the crisis, the government has mandated a number of changes to bureau reporting, which effectively mask the financial effects of those most impacted. In fact, now almost 9 months into the pandemic, CRAs are reporting a steady increase in credit scores as a result of this masking of information. But even in normal times, kind of CRA data is somewhat flawed. Firstly, you've kind of got this backward-looking theme to the data, typically a cycle or two out of date, and very much a kind of balance sheet position for the consumer. But then you've also got things that are missing. Priority debt payments are going to become more important, where things like council tax payments have been missed but need to be caught up. They won't appear on the bureau. And now there's also this kind of rising instance of buy now, pay later, which also doesn't necessarily appear in the credit reference data. So there's going to be information missing. You also have this closed data model. And I think if one thing open banking has done, it's proved that you can garner consent for individuals to share data. And actually, I think the closed data model is somewhat rooted in the past. And then there's this lack of understanding around consumers about what credit scores really mean and to what extent the CRA score itself is actually used in the lending decision. And I think that is definitely not well understood by consumers today. These underlying problems, I think, are now exacerbated by COVID. I guess what you're seeing now is you have rapidly changing consumer circumstances alongside kind of static CRA information. And ultimately, this is widening the kind of information asymmetry between consumers and lenders. And that creates a huge issue for lenders at a time when even more focus is being placed on them to ensure responsible lending. But lenders do need to adjust to the new reality. I guess there's two core things from my perspective. One is unpicking new data sources, and two is really engaging consumers in a way that consumers genuinely understand. I think one powerful tool that lenders can use is open banking data. The open banking ecosystem has been live now in the UK for nearly 3 years. And I think if we're honest about it, it's probably yet to fully deliver on the promises made at the start of the process. I think getting the ecosystem live and building coverage has definitely held back the use of the data. But 3 years on now, I think the ecosystem is much more stable and able to cover almost the entire market across current accounts and credit cards. Still, for much of the last 3 years, the focus has been on integration and movement of information through the ecosystem. Over the last year, however, the focus has been shifting towards use cases. And I think, again, COVID-19 has kind of played a bit of a part in that. So how do you unlock the value of open banking in the lending space? Well, actually, the consent journey itself is a key indicator. So just by providing the option for a consumer to consent to share their data actually tells you a lot about that consumer. And open banking as a raw data source can be very effective at identifying potentially high-risk individuals. So gambling or vulnerability are great examples of that, as is things like significant change in circumstance where there's been a kind of loss of income. You can see those things. But certainly from our experience, open banking data needs to be treated with caution. Whilst the information contained within the data is hugely valuable, it's also very easy to kind of misinterpret or misunderstand that data. So let me give you some examples of that. I guess one area where we've spent a lot of time in OpenWorks is looking at affordability and how you use open banking data to test affordability. And I guess most people really think about the key to unlocking the data in this space being categorization. But our experience developing these affordability use cases based on open banking data has been that categorization only ever solves so much of the problem. And I guess on this slide, what we've tried to do is highlight some of the classic examples of where open banking data without context can be misleading. So if we start off by just looking at income, in this example here, there's a lady, Sarah, and actually she has a joint account with her partner. Now, if I just look at open banking data, what I see is two income streams. I've got no way of understanding which one of these is Sarah's income unless I have some way of asking her a question. And as you can see, depending on how I treat that data without that context, it can deliver a very different answer around income. In the second example, you can see here, actually what we're looking at is a recent change in income. Now, in this case, Sarah has received a pay rise, but actually, I don't know whether that's temporary or permanent. Is that a one-off? Is that something I'm likely to see again? So unless I have a means to ask about that sort of information, I don't know. And then on the expenditure side, obviously lots of things go in to make up someone's expenditure, but there's also and always a large number of kind of one-off items. So in this case, you've got a significant expenditure going out over 4 months. Now, should I include that or exclude that? Well, unless I understand what this is really for, it's really impossible for me to make that judgment. And then lastly, and I think this is probably the most common one of all, is bank transfers. And so what you see in bank transfers is every single categorization engine that exists is very good at categorizing bank transfers as bank transfers. But unless you understand what those bank transfers are for, it's very difficult to understand exactly where they fit into someone's overall affordability assessment. And so the key for me really is when you're using open banking data, there's lots of things you can do with that data on its own. But if you really want to unlock the power of that data, you've really got to get to the context. And that means you've really got to engage the individual in the process. So what does all that mean for lending? Well, I think some of the more progressive lenders now are already starting to look at credit decisioning using only open banking data. But as we've seen, I guess this can be problematic unless you have that interface that allows you to gather context. Our view remains the best model is to bring together open banking data with the traditional CRA data and overlay that with first-party data provided by the consumer to get a complete view or picture of that consumer that's actually helpful for both the consumer and for the lender. Obviously, for the lender, the key benefit should be more informed and ultimately better underwriting. But probably more important for the sector as a whole, I think, is this rounded view and engagement with the consumer in the process. I think this takes that first step towards ensuring that you actually generate both confident and responsible borrowers as well as lenders. And then I think there's a kind of ancillary benefit of just getting the front end of this process right. And I think once you have access to this data source, it really is a first step towards creating more innovative and flexible lending products. Insight into ongoing income, expenditure, affordability measures allows creditors to offer more tailored solutions, especially when borrowers get into difficulty. And I think there's an option to really rethink how payments work. For example, in our Tully debt management product, we use ongoing open banking consent to deliver a flexible repayment solution for individuals in financial difficulty. And this solution looks at income each month and determines whether, in light of the income the individual has actually received in month, whether the payment arrangement we have with that individual is appropriate, and if it isn't, how does it need to be adjusted in order to work for that individual? I guess that's just one example, but when coupled with PISP, I think many options start to become available to really tailor products to individuals. I mean, things like micropayments suddenly become available. I think in short, open banking data is still in its infancy as a tool. And to date, far too much effort has been focused on the provision of that data. I think the next chapter now in this story will be focused on how this data can be used to deliver better targeted, personalized and flexible products for consumers. And that's going to underpin the future of lending. Thank you.